Okay, Mark, the headlines. I've been researching you. The headlines are Captain Calamity, an arrest in the Arctic Circle of 45 alleged charges, 2, European Adventurer of the Year and best-selling author. So for me, I don't think there are better press headlines that depict crossroads in someone's life, and this isn't even scratching the surface. I am delighted to welcome my friend, adventurer, author, and very soon to be father of 3 any moment. We're hoping Sophie won't do this on this call. Mark Agnew, welcome to the Crossroad.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a good introduction.
There's so much to discuss, Mark, and I am so privileged to have you joining me. Honestly, I really am. I've got your book here. There Will Be Headwinds, which the title alone intrigues me. And the book starts off with the 1st of July 2023. Now, that was actually a memorable day for both of us, Mark, because it was the day my daughter was born. And it was also a day that you were about to embark on a hugely intense journey yourself of crossing the Northwest Passage. And I have to caveat the importance that you just did this with manpower alone, no engine. And it's a feat that has been tried and tested unsuccessfully by many explorers before you. So it was a big day for both of us in very different capacities.
I can't believe you didn't, name your daughter after me as a result. I'm gutted. Yeah.
What would I have called her? Just Mark. That's quite cool.
Or maybe Maggie. So you got Mark Agnew.
Oh yeah, nice. Yeah, maybe for the next one, Mark, I'll have a think about that. But anyway, yeah. Big day, and I am obviously so intrigued to unpack all of that. I really, really am. But this pod does what it says on the tin, the crossroads. So I want to unpack the different directions that unfolded before you got to the point of launch date on Saturday, the 1st of July, 2023. So my question first to you is, what first drew you to adventure and exploration? Was there a key moment for you early on?
I guess, the journey to the start of the Northwest Passage was sort of it took me about 8 years when I first thought of it to then when it actually began. But the broader journey to becoming an adventurer, I guess there was it was all a slow momentum of many things. Like I've always been outdoorsy. My family holidays were camping. My dad is a proper explorer. My mum's an adventurer, and my mum in particular would regale me with stories, and we all knew that my dad was on Everest. So there was all this going on in the background. Secondly, I loved rugby. That was what I spent most of my youth doing. And I sometimes think that the kind of adventure that I go on, where there's a world record or a world first on the line, they are actually the sort of the Venn diagram of what I love about rugby and what I love about the outdoors. Because sure, I could go, I love being outdoors, being immersed in nature, camping, being in the elements, but without the goal of the pushing yourself for a record, for example, it doesn't have that sort of raw energy and shared mission that you get that produces the camaraderie, which I loved about rugby. So I'm like, I could go out and have an amazing experience in nature, but I wouldn't necessarily have camaraderie without the goal. So what I loved about rugby was all of us in a shed, like a fully committing sport. You throw your head at people's knees for fun on a Saturday, all for each other. And then you can go outdoors and be camping. But how do those things come together? Well, it's having a shared goal where you're giving it everything for each other's teammates in the outdoors. So I guess those things were like the background which came to it. Then 2 other things. One, just as we left uni, my friend Stuart sent me a video of people rowing the Atlantic and was like, let's do this. And although it took us years to actually organize that, it was like the moment where I thought about doing something specific. And also then leaving uni and going into the workplace and just sort of having a broader existential crisis where I was like, this cannot be it for the next 40 years or whatever. Like, please, no, the idea of it like makes me shiver. So I was like, God, please, people can't work out why do you do adventures, and no answer is like satisfying. But I also can't think of a satisfying answer why I like to be a lawyer or to be an accountant or to be a journalist or anything. And so I thought I might as well be an adventurer if I can't ask the question. So those are the sort of the big gears that were all grinding that led to this.
I really understand that. I really do. Did you go into a corporate machine when you left uni?
No, not even. I even got a job that I liked, and I wanted to be a journalist, and I wanted to live abroad but not take a gap year. So I moved to Hong Kong. I when I arrived there, I didn't have like an immediate job. A rugby club was helping me out with like accommodation and stuff. And I did a couple of different things for a few months, then got a job as a journalist, admittedly for a magazine called The Compliance Insider, which is, I had to quit that because I was just too bored of all the sex and drugs. But then I got a job as the adventure sports editor for the national newspaper in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for 8 years. That's a dream job. And it was cool, and I learned so much. And the people that I interviewed and the communities I came part of as being an adventure journalist were really fundamental in succeeding in the Northwest Passage in the things I learned from them. But equally, it was just like, I don't know, like even the idea of like asking for days off, like,
Yeah,
what?
I know.
Like,
It's really
dear,
tough.
dear boss, can I have one of my 25 days to see my family or do what I want? Like, what? Like the idea, and I know that like that's just how it's got to be, but just the idea of it like crushes me at my soul. So, but I love that job and I love those people, and I'm glad I did it. So I wasn't even in like a corporate machine or like losing my weekends or working very hard. It's more just the broader idea of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I'm like a motivational speaker. I work for myself, so I still have a job, and I work 5 days a week. But I guess I just love talking about myself. I've now found a way to get paid for it.
Well, we definitely need to go on to that. You can share your wisdom with others listening. When did you realize then that this wasn't a hobby for you? It was part of your identity. And I understand the wider piece. Was there a moment for you, I guess, when you were sat there in a job that you liked, thinking, God, I just can't do that? When did that become part of your identity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure if it was like a specific moment, like because for a while I would have said like Mark the rugby player rather than Mark the adventurer. But I was doing more and more just outdoor stuff, and maybe it was when I failed to row the Atlantic. When you don't have something, you realize how important it is to you. That I realized how much meaning it was giving me to have such a defined purpose. Like over the next 2 years, I'm going to be raising money, training, prepping, all for this goal. And then when I don't have that goal, I'm like, well, who am I? Kind of thing. So I guess that was sort of a defining moment, and a moment in the negative.
I feel like you've just dropped in there that rowing the Atlantic. So I know you mentioned that your friend
Yes.
teed you up on that. Talk to me about that kind of gap then. You're living in Hong Kong, you've had this friend share a video with you, and now you're actually pursuing it. I have noted from my research into you, Mark, which is so funny because I've known you a really long time, but you do call yourself a failed adventurer. When I think of that phrase, is this what you're maybe meaning?
Yeah, well, I mean, I explicitly failed to row the Atlantic twice. The first time, you can do like a pay per place. There's people who sell spots on their boat. And for me and my friend, that was an easy way to do it because I was living in Hong Kong, he's in the UK, we couldn't really plan and train together. So we bought 2 spots on this guy's boat, and he has articles going all the way back to the 90s called Captain Calamity. But when you really want to do something, it's easy to rationalize away anything, just like journalists and their bloody clickbait headlines. They don't know what they're talking about, calling this guy Captain Calamity. And we were rescued on the second night by helicopter. So, and ended up, as you noted in the start, under the headlines, Captain Calamity. Not me calling him Captain Calamity, but for a while. If you Googled me, that was certainly what came up.
It was, honestly, it was. And that's why it's interesting, the clickbait part of it, yeah.
If you Google me, it comes up with that.
It did. It came like a little bit further down, but it did.
Oh, good. A little bit further down. I'm trying so hard to promote my motivational speaking business.
I think you need
That's still going.
gigs.
A 2016 rescue. This is my SEO footprint. And that was actually like some duck off the water's back, that one, because it was like we made a mistake. We've got to organize this on our own and take some responsibility. And it was the second one where I actually ended up not going with my friend. It was too difficult to organize still, so I ended up going with somebody else. And we only got 3 days that time before I was rescued. And that time I was like, okay, twice now, I must be the problem, And the first time there was like no ambiguity, we got to get off. The second time there was like, did I make the wrong decision about getting off? Could I have gone on? There was a problem with the battery. Did I like exaggerate the problem in my mind? Was I looking for a face-saving excuse? Or was I, making a proper decision about not doing something reckless? And, I basically beat myself up and decided that maybe I'd taken a face-saving excuse and chickened out on the third night or whenever it was. And that like really, that was when we're talking about this is part of my identity. I was like, well, who am I now? This is
Yeah.
part of my identity. And I've failed twice. And not only, win two and a second day and a third day of the adventure. And I've chosen to get off. And I felt really, really very pathetic for a very, very long time. And that was 2018.
Oh my. I mean, with that failure and feeling, in your words, pathetic, you're absolutely not pathetic in my eyes or anyone who knows you and loves you. How did you, I'm just interested to know, like, how you kind of kept picking yourself up and carrying on. What was it for you that led you to the Northwest Passage? And I am also, I know there's loads of questions here, but I am also really interested in that failure piece and how that impacted you.
Yeah, well, I guess there was sort of several ways. One, like sort of time just heals all wounds. Two, the Northwest Passage was something I'd thought about before the first failed Atlantic attempt. So it was already in the back of my mind. And part of the reason I felt under pressure to get the Atlantic done is I felt like I needed the experience before going and doing something harder in the Northwest Passage. So there was like an urgency to it. When somebody who I'd spoken to about rowing the Northwest Passage then sort of announced that he was going to go and he needed a crew, I was like, well, I can't wait till I feel better. I've got to sign up or I miss the opportunity. And by signing up, sometimes you think that you have to feel better to do something, but sometimes by doing something, you feel better. So even having that purpose back in my life helped me again. Secondly, I did some in Hong Kong. There's a lot of trail running and ultra running. And that's what I was writing about mainly for the newspaper. So I started doing a bit of that. And the good thing about that for me was I'm just not a gifted runner. There is no way that I was going to even to have a good time, like a good speed. I mean, I'd have a fun time. A good time or a record or anything like that would be ridiculous. Like, for example, I did 100K and my goal was to finish in under 24 hours. The winner would have finished in 10 hours. So just to give an example of how far away I was, which meant that I could only engage in it on my own terms. I could be like, this is my personal goal. I'm here to have fun. I'm here to challenge myself. And therefore I couldn't get all caught up in the binary sense of winning records, outcomes like I did in the Atlantic, where my success had become purely binary about whether or not I became a world record setting adventurer or not. So it sort of began to remind me of all of the things I liked being about the outdoors. So that was this external thing. And then having signed up to the Northwest Passage, I started reaching out to psychologists and asking them about resilience to take to the Northwest Passage so I would avoid failure again. And I really thought that they were going to tell me ways to get tougher. But the first conversation I had was about maybe I'm defining success wrong, and started playing into the thoughts I was already having about trail running, saying, you're all about performance, but what about your experience? What about the relationships that you're having along the way? And I said, it just clicked. They gave me that language. They said performance, experience, relationships. I said, yeah, I want to be an adventurer because I want the experience of being immersed in the wild and the camaraderie, the relationships of sharing that, and the outcome facilitates those things. We're pushing hard for the record, but it doesn't define them. Like if we push hard and we have camaraderie and we're immersed in the wild, we don't set a record, I can still say it's a success. And I just clicked in my head. And even initially, I thought that was supposed to be like a protection layer. So I wanted the record, but if we didn't set it, I could at least sort of have a diverse portfolio of motivations that I could draw on. But over time, I realized that it wasn't just like an alternative. It was actually it was resilience. Like if I'm here because I want to have a wonderful adventure with my friends, then of course I'm going to go tomorrow because there's going to be more adventure with my friends, and the next day and the next day and the next day. And then there's a sort of an inevitable byproduct. You get to the end. And if you love the process and the pursuit, then you're more likely to engage in the pursuit and keep going because you're enjoying yourself and then get to the end. Whereas if you hate the pursuit and only see it as like an obstacle between you and the end, you might achieve it every now and then, but you'll eventually burn out and just not have a good time. And you'll keep getting to the end and saying, oh, I don't feel any better, or I have to do another record or something like that. So it was all began to feed into itself in terms of redefining what it was to be an adventurer and why I was there. By the time I got to the Northwest Passage, I was like, the Northwest Passage is important to me, the outcome, but only so much as it facilitates the experience and the relationship.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that relationship piece actually, because what an incredible experience to go through. How do you navigate tension and decision making and also that morale and camaraderie, as you say, in a very high stress environment?
Well, decision making, our leader was West, and he would take into account everybody's different opinions and then come to a decision, which wasn't always the opinion that I agreed with, but on other occasions it might be. And that's like sort of the nature of democracy. You have to accept the times it doesn't go in your favor, knowing that it'll go in your favor in other times. And I guess like initially I was super frustrated because I just didn't understand a lot of the decisions, and I felt there was a lack of dynamism. But towards the end, as it got the stakes got higher, the danger levels increased. I just really began to understand the decision metric and the conservative nature, and just thought that the West as a leader was really coming to his fore and completely keeping clarity on like balancing that need to push to get to the end before the weather got too bad with the need to be conservative and not make rash decisions. So he was in charge of decisions. I guess my secret for relationships is just like not to take things personally, and also not to have to resolve everything in the moment. If somebody's getting angry with me, you can sort of like nod along, and you can say your piece half an hour later or 2 hours later, like, hey, how are you feeling? By the way, I think you're right, but I also don't appreciate X, Y, and Z. You don't have to immediately like have your say, because then it turns into an argument and your say is lost. So that's my only thing. But also, like, it taken me so long and so much time and money and sacrifice, and my wife was like making a huge sacrifice on my behalf. I just thought nothing is going to stop me having fun here. I felt like under pressure to have fun. Like if I got back and my wife at 6 months pregnant and looking after a 1-year-old while I'm in the Arctic had said like, how was it? And I would say, oh, it was a bit rubbish actually. Like it would have almost been insulting to her. So I was like, I'm going to have a good time no matter if anybody else is having a fight. If anybody else doesn't like each other, I'm going to like everybody, and everybody's going to like me. And I'm going to have fun. And it sort of like focused me. And having said that, obviously there were times where I was especially knackered and having anything but fun. But it's also, it just, yeah, fun and meaning and purpose and challenge. It was, when I say fun, it's not like it's fun. It's like, challenging. Yeah. Giving me meaning and purpose.
And I think, that having the overall of like, this is an incredible experience, a once in a lifetime experience, and you absolutely smashed it, Mark. And there's just so many questions to say, and we definitely have to talk about your wife Sophie at some point too, because I'm interested in also the relationships back home. We definitely will come on to that, but I'm sat here with your book. Obviously, There Will Be Headwinds, and just from what you're saying, the title alone suggests struggle. So what does headwind represent to you beyond the literal?
That became my mantra to myself in the Northwest Passage, about letting go of things I can't control. So one day I was particularly frustrated with headwinds, and I wish there weren't headwinds. I wish we could just go in quicker. I thought, I can't expect a kayak thing to find Northwest Passage only with tailwinds. There are going to be headwinds. There will be headwinds. And the moment you accept that, you can then engage in other parts of the adventure without like wasting all of your energy on getting frustrated about something that you can't control, the weather. And then I started applying that to other things, like team tensions. Oh, there will be headwinds. I can't expect to do the Northwest Passage without headwinds. We were racing 2 other teams, and I was trying so hard, like, yes, to beat them, but not to like define my whole experience about whether or not they were catching up with us or not, like that, or things like that. I didn't want my experience to be based on that. So yes, they might be catching up with us today, but there will be headwinds. What can I focus on? So it was all about just accepting that things are out of your control, and then focusing on the things that I could control, which could be as small as like seeing a beautiful color in a cliff, or stopping for a chocolate bar to make yourself feel better, or the next stroke, or having a conversation with Eileen, or anything,
Yeah.
And so it became my mantra, and I decided sort of halfway through Northwest Passage it would be the title of my book.
Of course, you got a lot of thinking time, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to highlight, Mark, is if you could just unpack a little bit as to what the Northwest Passage entailed for you. And also, I would love to understand a little bit more about the 2 teams that you were racing against, because am I right in saying that you were meant to be on one of the other boats.
Yes. So what is the Northwest Passage? If you want to get from the Atlantic to the Pacific, you've got to get past the two Americas. So that means you can either go under South America, you can go through the Panama Canal, or you can go over Canada and Alaska. Obviously, over Canada and Alaska is the most impractical and the longest, and that's the Northwest Passage. And for centuries, explorers were looking for it since Henry VIII, and then even Elizabeth I sent some. But then in the 19th century, the British sent a lot of people, and people found it. And then there was the first person to make it through, and then the first person to sail through, and then the next thing was the first person to try and get through under human power, which is possible because the ice is missing, is disappearing, and people have been trying that since a decade or so, and as we went, there were two other teams, a rowing team coming from the other end and a rowing team coming from the same end as us, who started after us. And that rowing team coming from the same direction as us was my previous team. And I've been planning with them since just before COVID. And obviously we had delays because of COVID, as everybody did. And but we began to have more and more questions and tensions with the captain. It was similar to my first rowing attempt on the Atlantic, where it was sort of a paper place. You raise your money, you give your money, and then he organized it. But it was different in the fact that everybody on board was pretty experienced. So he, from his perspective, I suppose he found all of our questions like annoying and inherently negative because we were questioning him. And from our perspective, we were finding like it was confusing and opaque because we didn't know where the money was going and why we were delaying again. And that eventually came to a head, and four of us were sort of expelled from the team in ambiguous fashion about whether or not we were forced off or quit or whatnot, and with a vague promise of if you're behaving like gentlemen, we'll give you a refund, and that refund has never appeared, and that was the worst moment of my life because Sophie just given birth to Naomi, and I'm supposed to be this like pillar of strength for her and my new child, and I'm just getting more and more overwhelmed as I'm spiraling towards this situation where I like can't see how we're going to help get to the start of the Northwest Passage, and everything I'm trying is just creating more friction. And then I thought, right, what have I learned about resilience? Focus on what you can control and focus on the experience, not the outcome. So therefore I can go on an adventure. I don't need this guy to like facilitate it. That's what I could control. I own a couple of kayaks in my house in Edinburgh. I could, kayak, go down to the shore today and have an adventure. And B, it's about the adventure. I could go and be immersed in the wild on the west coast of Scotland. It doesn't have to be the Northwest Passage. It's not about whether or not I'm the first to do the Northwest Passage. It's about whether I have that experience. So I regained a little bit of control, went over to my house in Edinburgh, Sophie and Naomi in the car. I went in, collected all my kayaking gear. And then just as I shut the door, I got a text that was from him. He'd sent it to everybody in the team, comparing me to a man trying to drown the expedition. And as soon as they get rid of me, we'll finally float back to the surface. And obviously my heart went through the roof. So I shut the door and I realized I'd locked all of my kayaking stuff on the other side. So it was like a metaphor of the control that I just lost. I can't go on an adventure now. And, I couldn't speak. I was so upset. And the money that I'd lost was considerable, and it's not now just the money that I've lost on expeditions. It's like pounds and opportunities that I should have given to my daughter if I was a responsible parent, and that was the lowest moment of my life. Like to lose that control, to lose that money, to let down your family, and then to be blamed for it. Like be compared to a man who's trying to drown somebody when all I'm trying to do is help, like when I'm desperately trying to achieve the goal. So yeah, I sort of slowly quit the team, and then I rejoined the team, and then I just thought I can't be part of this team. So then I called our rival kayaking team, and I said, I know you guys need a person. And my friend from the rowing team came with me. The two of us joined. But when he didn't get up to speed with the kayaking as quickly as I did, because he was starting from an even lower place than I did. So the fact that he took that plunge was amazing and brave, and I wouldn't have done it on my own without him. So, he didn't end up in the Northwest Passage, unfortunately, but I wouldn't have done so without him. So I went to the Arctic, and with these guys I'd never met, I literally flew to the Arctic and met them on day one, and ended up in a race against this person who had been the cause of like the worst moment of my life. And I was grappling always with trying not to like let that race define my experience, and whether win, lose, or draw. And it was savage. So yeah, that's the race, and that was the I walked the Northwest Passages, and yeah, I touch on that in the book.
You do.
Yeah,
It's really, really interesting. And on Mark, I'm so grateful at how vulnerable and honest you're being, because it takes a lot of guts for anyone to share that so openly. And God, I'm almost tearing up here. I need to get a grip myself. But I think,
yeah, I can't believe I was like looking out the window, cheering up there. I was like, "Get out of here! You did it, man!"
you did it. But I think when you bring in your children to it like, it's game over for the emotions. Honestly, yeah. Let's take a pause. Mark,
Yeah.
Thinking though of that guy, I mean, how very dare he pin that all on you? But if you do think about the race, I mean, what an incredible crossroad to be at your lowest moment, but to still go for it and be successful. Tell us what happened between the three the three races, because if you had been on the other boat, it would be a very different story you'd be telling me right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a lot of friends on that boat. It was the captain who we eventually had the fallout with, and other people on the boat had similar concerns to me, but they didn't have the option of just like switching to a kayaking team, and they did go for it. And I think they had some wonderful experiences along the way, saw some whales, and as we all did. So I can't speak to their experience specifically, but what happened was around about the same time we started from the eastern end, two rowing boats, two single rowing boats came from the other end, Matty and Adam. So we were coming towards each other, and Adam very early hurt his shoulder. So Matty ended up going on by himself in a solo rowing boat. And we had immense respect for him, and we're constantly getting updates. And of course, we were like interested partially in how fast he's going compared to us, but we were also interested in him as a human. Like, wow, I can't believe he's going by himself. And he even arrived halfway at the same time as us, but he was staying in a cabin outside of town, so we never got a chance to see him. And I think he said something about he was just so focused he didn't want to like chat to anybody. And he made it a little bit further, but eventually had to drop out. And the day he dropped out, we named our camp Camp Matty in his honor, because he did over 1,000 miles by himself in a rowing boat. Just absolute, so much respect. And I hope one day to have many beers with him. And then coming from the other direction was, coming from the same direction as us was my former teammates. And they started long after us, because they, one of the reasons we fell out was because their plan was to outboard motor the boat. So he outboard motored the boat from Scotland to Shetland to Faroe Islands to Iceland, and then got a tow from there up through the gap in Greenland. They started, but they were on one of those ocean rain boats where there's a little cabin on board, so you take it in turns and shifts. You row for 2 hours, and you 2 hours with your teammates, row for 2 hours, sleep for 2 hours, which means you can move 24 hours a day. So when the weather was good, they really racked up speed quickly, and eventually caught up with us within 70 miles of us. At one point, their anchor had come off, and they'd floated away, and they couldn't row back to their anchor. So they'd used their outboard motor to get back their anchorage and then start rowing from there. So they were saying, so even by the time they caught up with us, there was a bit of contention, because they were saying they're still doing the human power first. And we were saying it's not human power, you use a motor. Well, they were saying we didn't use a motor. We motored back to the same spot and rowed from there. But, life would have been very easy if we could have just taken, the big difficulty, the key tension for us from a personal perspective, the thing that was, I'd say, creating the most tension was whether or not to kayak that day. Because if the weather was borderline, you couldn't risk it. And we had to wait for perfect conditions. And people had different opinions of what those conditions were. Is this 5-hour weather window enough? If we go for 4 hours and stop early, is that a buffer, or should we not go at all today? And that decision would have been really easy if we could have just gone and then 5 hours in thought, actually it's worse than we thought we were, and motored back to where we started and tried again the next day. So for them to say, so I was like, they're out of the race. And then it really got to me because they were saying we're still in the race. And I was like, I've already beaten you. But they're going in 70 miles of us, and we all hunkered down in a very long storm, waiting for the storm to break and assuming that they were going to overtake us as soon as the storm did break. But when the storm did break, they turned around and went back to an Inuit settlement and took an airplane out, and we continued on. And at that point, we were the last ones left. So we knew all we had to do was finish. And we sort of had this saying to each other, like, don't screw the pooch. It felt like we were in the last 2 minutes of the World Cup final, and all we had to do was not give away a penalty. We didn't have to score. We didn't have to go fast. We had to just finish. But of course, at that point, we also were running out of weather because it was late in the year. It was getting into October. So we were like, we have to finish before the weather gets too bad. We have to finish before we run out of food. But we just don't want to do something stupid and rush because there's really nobody to beat now except for ourselves. So that was the race. And yeah, I can't believe, we won, I suppose.
You won. Absolutely. And Mark, is that a record-breaking thing you've done?
So it's a world first. And for this ease of explaining it to people, I sometimes call it a record, or sometimes call it a world first record, because I guess we're the first people recorded to do it. Yeah, I mean, it depends. Like, what is a world first world record? It's not a Guinness World Record. But a lot of adventurers either indifferent to Guinness or actively dislike them. I would say I'm indifferent. If it happened to be a Guinness record, I would say, cool, and I'd take the certificate. But my teammate would say, don't give me it. I don't want Guinness. Because they, I mean, who are they to be the governing, who elects them to be the governing body of the maritime definition of the Northwest Passage? And it's a bit it's sort of random. So we were going by the definition of the Northwest Passage as per the International Hydrographic Association boundaries, which is like the national political governing body for marine borderlines, which is not the same as what the Guinness Book of Records are defined as. So yeah, we're the first people to kayak it, to do it by human power in a single season. One guy has done it by human power over 3 years before, although he, again, did a slightly different definition. So if I was to be really anal about our definition, I'd say he hasn't done it at all. But I just don't want to be part of there's so many people in polar sport who have egos and want to quibble over definitions. And I just want to say we all had adventures. I'd love to hear about the time you saw narwhals and talk about the time I saw narwhals, rather than quibble over who did it 40 miles here or 30 miles there, So yes, I call myself a 2 times world first record holder, but and I think that's right, and I could defend it, but it also doesn't matter that much to me.
Well, I mean, you should. It's absolutely amazing, and it's so worth saying it because it's such a huge achievement. I mean, there's so many things I could ask you, but what was it like when you actually achieved it? You've had these failures before. You were so low. You got a young family at home, and you actually did it. What was that moment like for you?
Well, the final few minutes were chaos. There was the peninsula that marks the end of the passage that goes into the Beaufort Sea, and these crashing waves were bursting over the peninsula. And all day we'd been kayaking with these gentle swells, and there must have been a shoal under the water that had just changed the profile. So they were smashing and crashing, and it was so intense. And crashing waves are the most advanced skill you can get as a kayaker. And as I say, I'd made this last switch from rowing. So I'd done 2 or 3 days in Cornwall with a private coach, and then I got into the Northwest Passage. And and I'm sure that was part of the tension that I was talking about before, about whether or not to go on any given day. West, the captain, for all I know, he may have gone in more advanced conditions if he'd had more faith in my kayaking ability. But so all of this was playing in, and in this final moment, we suddenly faced with 100 meters to go between us and the goal, and these waves are smashing down on the surface of the water. And it took all of my concentration, all of my will, and above all, it took Eileen, who I was in a tandem kayak, and she was the one steering, and she is a very experienced kayaker and somebody who has my eternal respect and trust. And she was steering, and I was communicating with her. Here comes one. And okay, pick it up. And she's working the pedals, and really, no doubt, saved my life as we shot past the end of the peninsula into the calm water. And I try and scream to Eileen, "We've done it! We've done it!" But instead, I just cry
Oh my.
and I cry and I cry. Like I shake with tears at like the catharsis, the relief, the redemption, the success, just welling up from somewhere. And when I see like Rory McIlroy winning the Masters after his however many attempts and he's crying, I just think I know what you're feeling. And when I see actually in that moment, I thought about like Andy Murray taking the final shot at Wimbledon, and then as he sees it fly past his opponent, dropped to his knees and let go of his tennis racket, and I was like, I know what Andy Murray feels like. And yeah, I just couldn't control myself. And isn't it great, as you say, to see a man so vulnerable? But not when nobody else is being vulnerable, and the other three people would just sort of have to sit there and yeah. Oh, this is going on for a while.
No, it's incredible.
But then the Northwest Passage, the end of it's not really near anything. So it wasn't the end. We had to kayak for another few hours that day, and then for another 3 days, we were out there. I mean, I had one more kayak crossing, but we were stuck in a storm after that. So we were stuck 30 miles from the end for 2 more nights. And that's when the weather really got savage. Like the back of our tent was being buried in snow. And, on the second finish, I guess, the one where we actually end, like it wasn't such an emotional release. But there was a few like funny moments where, the wind was so strong that we couldn't hear each other speak in the tent. I could see my teammates moving their mouths. It was just like, and our back of our tent was getting buried. So I went out with a paddle and dug the snow out of the back of our tent. And it was pitch dark and the wind, and I just the snowdrift like spinning past the light of my head torch just was a really visceral experience. And then in something like 18 hours later, I was in a hotel room, like losing my temper because the Wi-Fi was slow, and I was trying to upload some pictures for a press release. And I just found the contrast between my problems within just less than 24 hours was amusing. And but then we got to an abandoned airport, and a plane came and picked us up. We had to saw the kayaks in half to try and get, or the end of the kayaks off to try and get them into the tiny airplane. And then as we lifted up, that was another moment where I was like looking out the window, and my normal had become being immersed in that environment. And like the second we pulled up out of it and got a literal bird's eye view, it felt like alien. And I thought, I can't believe that was my normal. It looks so savage. And as soon as I'm out of it, it seems alien. And that was the moment. And I turned to West, and he was just crying, and we'd held hands. That was an emotional moment. And I think West had been as a leader, had been carrying a lot of a burden, and was always concerned about our safety.
Yeah.
And as I say, we had a lot of frustration. Different wanted to be more dynamic, but then he wanted to be more safe. And so if the fault in my leader is that he wanted to be too safe, that's a good fault to have. And West always has my many positive things. I can't even be like respect and gratitude and amazing. Yeah, and that moment where we're holding hands is pulling up out of the world that we'd been in for so long. Was after 103 days. It was amazing.
I do want to unpack a little bit the dangers, Mark. Did you know the dangers you were going into, or when you were in it, did you think, was there any point that you thought, I don't know if I'm going to make it? I know that's a really intense question to ask you, but when you're talking about it, to me, like that would be my fear.
Yeah, well, yes, it was very dangerous. It was probably even more dangerous than I thought it was going to be. I hoped that we would see a polar bear, and by the end, I was bloody sick of polar bears. I was like, who told me these were? Who told me these things are endangered? They're bloody everywhere. And and they were trying to get into our tent, but all of them would run away as long as we make a noise. And I think my teammates thought that I was petrified of them, and I definitely was scared. I had a healthy fear of polar bears, but I was like trying to react to every interaction with like a degree of urgency before it escalated, which they interpreted as me being like terrified where they were being chilled. And we saw a lot of them, and like we became more relaxed as we realized that they would generally run away. The first one that wandered past our tent, I got out of the tent so quickly, I accidentally punched Jeff in the face and gave him a bleeding lip, and then screamed at the polar bear and shot flares in the air, and then stood there like on guard with a shotgun while everybody else got dressed. And then just within a few weeks, Jeff, who's a very chilled out Texan man, was like, you guys hear that? And he put his head out and he's like, oh man, there's a polar bear here. Go on, shoot, get, go on. He comes back in and we're like, and he's like, oh, he's gone. And I was like, okay. So yeah, the polar bears are definitely something that were a worry. And I do think that in some ways we were probably lucky. I think in bear country you usually don't eat in the clothes you're going to sleep in, and that kind of stuff don't smell like food. And we were just like eating in there and whatnot. But equally, it wasn't always possible to eat outside. And the ice, there was definitely a lot more ice than anticipated. And there was an occasion where two bits of ice slammed together with Eileen and I in between them. And I really thought that we were going to get crushed to death at that point, although probably it was happening too quickly to really articulate that thought before it was over. But instead, it smashed into us, pinched the bottom of our kayak, and lifted us up into the air. And that was the middle of an 18-hour day where we covered 40-something miles in 10 or so hours. And we had maybe 3 miles left, and the last 3 miles took us another 7 hours because the ice moved in and was just swirling around us. And we were trying to navigate through it. And then in the midst of that, we got slammed and picked up by it, which really, really is a moment where if something had been 1% different, we would have been crushed to death. But even that's the best day of the trip. I think we all agree that was the best day of the trip. It was just a beautiful day. Like the sun turned the color of the ice, this rich orange. It was like every piece of ice had this light bulb inside it that was glowing orange. And then on the other side, the moon turned all of that water this rich purple. Like all of the ice had these light bulbs inside it that were purple. And there's just like a line down the middle of my kayak where one side of the world was orange and one was purple, like a surreal painting of night and day meeting. And there were narwhals and there was camaraderie as we fought for our lives together, and there was polar bears on shore. And oh, what a day. I'd love to be back there. That we all agreed that was just one of the best days. It had everything you're looking for: challenge, adventure, wildlife, camaraderie, and a beautiful camp spot to finish. But there was one day where we were going through a very narrow passage, which had a very strong tide. So we needed to get the tide exactly right, which required our shore team to text us the tide times, and they texted us the wrong times. So we ended up in the passage with very little margin for error, with the tide coming towards us, and it was just bringing with it 1,000,000 tons of ice. And that was like, right, we got 30 seconds to get shore or we're dead kind of thing. There was no and it was because it was human error. It didn't feel like part of the journey. And because it was relying on somebody else, and because I'd sort of noticed the tide times are wrong, and I said to everybody, it seems like if we go tomorrow at this time, if you work backwards from there, then the tide table shouldn't be saying this. So I didn't trust my own guts. There was a lot of things that was like frustrating about it. And at that point, we managed to get from the middle of the passage to an outcrop of rock just off the shore. So it was maybe only like, I don't know, 20 meters or 50 meters to maybe even less than that between us and the shore. But that rock, the outcrop of rock, was funneling the ice between us and the shore. So there was more ice. It was moving quickly. And we had to dash across this to get to shore before it was too late. And in that moment, I thought to myself, like, what would it be like to die here? I pictured myself floating away with this ice and what I would think. And if my final thoughts were like, if I just have 1% extra to give, and I haven't, and now I'm leaving my daughter fatherless, and a child I've never met fatherless, who hasn't been born yet, that will be such a monumental failure to them. I have to find a way to unlock 100% of what I'm able to give at the next 30 seconds. And, like the thing that limits your muscles in like a biological sense, the strength at which they contract, the speed at which they can contract, they tend to have a huge buffer. They only exert, I don't know, I'm picking a number out here, but like 70% of their maximum, because your brain limits it. Because if it goes to 100%, there's no, and it injures itself, then it's going to be worse. So how do I access that extra 10% to let my body know that it's not preserving itself for anything? There is no tomorrow unless it goes 100%. So, and I thought somewhere back in my mind, a book called Endure by Alex Hutchinson, about how love can produce endorphins and access a degree of performance that you can't get. So I started screaming my daughter's name in my head, like, Naomi, 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 and spinning my paddles faster than I'd ever spun them before, wanting to get to shore and collapse with exhaustion, knowing that I had like nothing left out there. And would it be much better to kayak with purposeful technique and matching that Eileen could match, than just like going out there like a fucking madman. But yeah, as it happened, we just got through and made sure, and we were all very, very, very angry. But then, like the devil's faceless, and within 5 minutes, we were all talking about, exchanging stories about university and skimming stones and waiting for the ice to move, and just life goes on and that kind of thing. And it's quickly like amazing how quickly you can just sort of get over it and move on. So that was the one day that was really like a kind of a not fun near-death experience, but equally get over it very quickly and move on.
Incredible. It doesn't sound to me like you had that sort of mental resilience to think, no, not today, actually. Like, I'm gonna see the birth of my next child and I'm gonna be there. It didn't sound like to me, like sometimes I think people think, oh, I actually really thought I was gonna die there. But that mental resilience, I'd love to understand how do you train for mental resilience, Mark? Because it must be as much as the physical side of training.
Yeah, so I'm very intentionally, with the help of the psychologist, which I interviewed, which I talk about in the book, there's frequent chapters which are dedicated to those interviews, about building mental strength. And on the first Atlantic row, I was really focused on physical fitness, and I was much fitter and stronger than I've ever been before or since. So going to the Arctic, I was less fit, which sounds less ideal. But it's because in my training, rather than just like worrying about my, I guess, like gym metrics and heart rate metrics, I try to incorporate as much mental training as possible. So when I was training for the Northwest Passage, which was the majority of my training because it was such a short period between me changing teams and actually going, living in Hong Kong, I would row out around the back of this island called Lama Island and back again. It was maybe 20 something miles. It was maybe almost a marathon. I would do that on a lot of Saturday mornings. And around the backside of it, it's quite exposed to these swells. And I'm by myself, and I got to concentrate on my technique. Otherwise, I'll fall out. And concentrating on your technique, it's a mental energy. It's just like physical energy. If you try to run at 5 kilometers an hour, you'd eventually slow down to 4 kilometers an hour and 3 kilometers an hour and 2 kilometers an hour, and then you'd have to stop. It's the same with mental energy. You could really concentrate, and then you concentrate less and less and less until really difficult to concentrate. And just like in running, where if you practice running at 5 kilometers an hour, you can sustain it for longer. If you practice concentrating, you can sustain it for longer. So it was the being on my own, isolated, accountable to myself, and focusing and concentrating around the back. And it was a 20-mile road. I can't remember what it took me, let's say 3 hours or 4 hours or whatever. In the gym, if I rode for 4 hours, I could have sustained a much higher heart rate for that time. And if I did that every Saturday, I would have been incredibly fit. But it wouldn't have had the element of unknown, stress, accountability, and all of the mental skills that I was practicing that I would need in the Arctic. And sometimes it was even more intentional than that. I took a rowing boat out and I did a 4-kilometer strip backwards and forwards past the boathouse at night by myself from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. So it was 12 hours, and it was in the dark, and it was by myself. And every time I passed the boathouse, I could have got out because it was just right there. And because it was in the dark, there was no view, there was nothing to stimulate yourself, there was nobody to talk to. It was boring. And because it was 12 hours rather than like I'm going to do 100K, like no amount of additional effort would make the finish line closer. So it's not like, all right, if I just push myself a little bit harder, it's going to be over in an hour instead of 2 hours. It's like I'm here for 12 hours, whether I push myself or not. So I'm practicing the boredom, the stress, the self-reliance, the option to quit and saying no to it. And above all, pushing myself when the finish line isn't clear. In a marathon, where the finish line is. In the Arctic, as I said before, like we were 3 miles from shore and the additional 3 miles took a sudden 7 hours. I was practicing for exactly that kind of scenario where can I continue to tell my body to push itself when the finish line isn't like clear, and it could be 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours, or 20 hours, as it sometimes was. So I was practicing all of those like intentionally, and I was just framing everything through that. I did an ultra marathon, my knee completely blew out, and I was like, well, do I have the mental toughness to go through this or not? And it was framed through that exactly. And it was more useful than if I had just like nailed the marathon. Yeah, that's what I was doing constantly. And by the time I thought I was going to get to a level where I'd be tough enough to deal with this uncertainty, but I like got past that level where I was enjoying it. I was like, well, this is why I'm here. And on the first night in the Arctic, the ice pack moved. We were stuck offshore. We took 14 hours to get just back to where we started amid 0 miles. And I was like, this is so much fun. This is exactly why I'm here. And like that level of uncertainty 5 years ago, 5 years before would have overwhelmed me. 2 years before, I would have been tough enough to deal with it. And by the time I got there, I was like, this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
Because I'm here for the adventure, the challenge, the relationships, the camaraderie. And I have the mental skills to sit with discomfort, deal with the uncertainty, and transcend them. They're just sort of going on in the background rather than having to deal with them and focus on the things that I enjoy.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I'm assuming with this mental resilience and building upon that, we do need to absolutely to discuss your arrest in the Arctic Circle and the 45 alleged charges. What happened there, Mark? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, probably not the moment that I performed best. I didn't rise to the challenge on this one. But we allegedly camped on a bird sanctuary without a permit. And then when we arrived halfway, an Inuit settlement called Cambridge Bay, Parks Canada were waiting on shore to arrest us, and they did. And they detained us and they interviewed us. And then they eventually gave us 45 criminal charges each, with something like a minimum of 3,000 and a maximum of 300,000 pounds per fine, or maybe Canadian dollars. I can't remember what the numbers were, which obviously is very, very serious. And at the time, it was like, I was completely overwhelmed by it because we'd kayaked like 20 miles and then taken a break and then done 50 miles in the last 36 hours. And we were excited about finally getting into halfway. And and they really, I tried to tell them the story of what had happened with the rowing team in the interview to say, look, guys, I've tried my best to do this the right way. I'm not like, we're not just completely, right, well, our name is the Cowboys, so we're not cowboys as it is. To give the example of the other team, to say that I'm trying to do this as ethically and as properly as possible. So this is like an honest mistake, and that was a mistake talking about that because, as you see now, it's years on, and I still get emotional about it. So that like opened up the flood wells and they really jumped on my emotional state with a bunch of leading questions. Isn't it true that so and so is in charge? Isn't it true? And I was like nodding along. So I really didn't help myself there. And then they confiscated all our stuff, all of our safety stuff, including things like flare guns, which aren't illegal. In fact, Parks Canada say on their website that you need to have them. You don't need a license for them. I don't know why they confiscated that. So it felt like they were trying to stop us going on. And but we went on without the safety equipment and finished. And then the charges, then we all had lawyers, and it went on for a long time, over a year, maybe at least almost a year, definitely. And it went to a trial, and the charges were dropped. The trial was literally like, the next case is Parks Canada versus the Arctic Cowboys. This case is over. Please return the stuff to the Arctic Cowboys as soon as possible. And I don't know why. And I don't know why it was dropped. My guess would be this, and this is a guess that is uneducated, but whether or not we broke the law and went into a bird sanctuary without permits, 45 criminal charges is such an overstep. And confiscating all of our stuff with an emergency warrant, which is sort of, I think, required for like guns and drugs and stuff, is such an overstep that it became sort of almost an abuse of power and almost an abuse under our constitutional rights and Canadian law. So that's my guess of why it was dropped. And I also suspect that in the background, so we got permission from the Inuit authority to go there, but not from Parks Canada. The publicity off the bat would have been very difficult about that the Inuit had given us permission to be on Inuit land, and then Parks Canada said they don't have the right to do that. That would the white government in Toronto. So I think that would have been a nightmare too. So I think there was a number of reasons why it got dropped. Whether or not we actually did it, because we had a permission from somebody. So it's just confusing. But anyway, we're not guilty. But we tried our best to get the permissions.
I do quite enjoy that part of this. Is the court case was against what are you called, the Cowboys?
The Arctic Cowboys, yeah.
clearly wasn't very helpful in your cause, but I'm so thrilled to hear
Yeah.
that you came through it.
I have actually heard that there were things going on in the background where they had problems with even our name, and they were calling various people about the look of it. The white Arctic cowboys being there, and so But I don't think adventurers have the right to just go where they want for the sake of adventure. So that's not what I'm saying. And we tried to get permission off the Inuit community, and we got it, and that's what we thought we had, and it just became a bit confusing, really. Bird sanctuaries are important. And just because I want to kayak there doesn't mean I can.
Yeah. Mark, only scratching the surface on so many twists and turns that have happened throughout the years. How have these experiences and adventures shaped who you are present day?
Well, I'm certainly, I'd say more resilient. Actually, I'd say the most thing I am is like so content and fulfilled, and that's not because I've now achieved something and it's the end of the movie, but it's because through doing that, I've managed to redefine what it is I want. And, if I hadn't failed in the Atlantic, I wouldn't have had that introspection and that process to realize that it's about the experience and the relationships. And now that I can articulate that to myself, I can draw on it for anything I'm doing. I'm here for the experience. I'm here for the relationships. I'm here for the challenge rather than the outcome. So instead of constantly being frustrated about like, what's my next record? What's my next paycheck? What's my next extrinsic validation? I say, am I challenging myself? Am I having a good experience? Am I having a relationship? And I can define that all to myself. And that just brings me, I'm like a Buddhist monk. I actually couldn't imagine like somebody being more like at Zen in their gut. I say in my gut because before I felt like there was a lead ball in my gut, and I used to feel like the physical weight of the failures and the ambition were placed in my gut, and that's where I felt it. But now it's just like, I feel like it's so great. And I recommend to everybody being able to articulate your intrinsic motivations gives you the power to define success on your own terms and not just about what some kind of future destination is. Because if you've got destination addiction, you just keep arriving there and keep finding that you're not any more happy, because happiness is like an emotion that comes and goes. And sometimes I'm happy and sometimes I'm not. But contentment is like a state which sits with you, and it isn't defined by happiness or sadness or what's going on in a given moment. So super content. Within that, very, I'd say resilient in the sense that I'm able to just get back up and keep going, and very few things stress me out. And 3, able to think in very long term, and I think all of these things coincide with having children at the same time as well. So the causation is the Northwest Passage happened at the same time as my family began to grow, and being able to think long term. I was crushed by this existential crisis that we're all running out of time, and like, what if I get to the end of my life and I've not done anything interesting, and I got to do it now because you're only ever young once, and it took me 8 years, and it was great when it happened the way it had to happen, and it couldn't have happened any other way. And now I'm like starting this. Well, I'm 2 years into my career as a motivational speaker, and I'm sort of like, and it's going well, and I have a salary that is livable and continues to grow, and all of these things, and I think it will grow, and I think I would have been very frustrated by the urgency to be where I need to be a few years ago, but now I'm like, it's going to take 3 years, it's going to take 5 years, it's going to take 10 years. It's just 10 years. Yeah, but things that I want to do, I still act with urgency. I don't just let them happen. I try and back my chat and do what I say what I'm going to do. But I realize that it doesn't happen overnight.
No, and I think that's really powerful messaging, actually. And it's very relatable, especially to maybe a younger man. I'm thinking of some men in my life, actually, where they will say to me, I just don't feel that fulfillment. I don't feel that peace. And they've got that knot in their tummy. And to a certain extent, Mark, I have that knot in the tummy too. Part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is because, I want to chat to interesting people like you, because of this whole, it's not about the destination, it is about the journey. Because if I'm being truthful to you, I just want to be knowing that destination is going to happen. But what I'm hearing from you is it will happen. It doesn't matter how long it takes. There doesn't seem to be self-doubt in you that you wouldn't make whatever it is you want your next adventure to be happen.
Yeah, well, adventure or otherwise, or career goals or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not specifically adventure. I've just got a general patience now. But yeah, in terms of the journey, not the destination, like, yes, that is true. But like a journey is defined by a destination. So it becomes really difficult to say like, well, what is the journey? Like, is doing the podcast now with less listeners than I want in 10 years, is that the journey? But what I say, this is my talk now, like, define the journey, because the destination is defined. So the journey can't be an abstract, wishy-washy concept. Define it. And there's only four things a journey can be to you. Is it a challenge? Is it an experience? Is it a relationship? Or is it a cause, like a charity? And if you say the journey for me is I want to challenge myself, then you can say, then suddenly like, oh my goodness, I'm not getting as many bookings on gigs, or I'm not getting whatever. I say, well, I'm challenging myself. Like, I'm having to learn about sales now. I'm having to make cold calls. And if I really wanted to get more talks, every time somebody hung up on me on a cold call, I would have failed. But I want to challenge myself. And the fact that I even find it difficult to pick up the phone means that I've done that. And then somebody hangs up on the other end, I say, I'm here to challenge myself, and I did. So that's a success. Of course, that means I'm going to pick up the phone the next time, the next time, the next time. I'm not going to get disheartened by the outcome because I'm doing what I want. When I go up on a big stage, when like a talk to like Google or BNP Paribas or one of those clients, like the pressure to perform because of the fee and because the potential for future work and the effect on my career is outcome, but I'm here for the experience. I'm honored to, and like I've got hundreds of people now, and I got to tell them the story. And I'm at Google. I'm going to enjoy the experience. And the relationships, basically never get to work with people, so I'm going to try and start my own podcast. I've got a co-host, and obviously I love that podcast to be number one listened to and to pay for itself, and also to lead to more inquiries for talks. But I'm going to try and say this is about having a shared goal and working with somebody and brainstorming and, oh, I love that idea and you like my idea, and pushing ourselves, because it's about the relationships and the causes. And I give free talks to any state school that's sort of within a reasonable distance of my house. And like, that's just about getting to go out and tell the story. And yes, I say enjoy the destination, enjoy the journey, not the destination to them. But I don't try and labor the corporate points too much, because it's just a bunch of kids. And that's just fun. I get to do it, and it brings me fulfillment. And if I keep doing all of those things, challenging myself by picking up the phone, eventually somebody's going to say yes. Enjoying the experience of being on a big stage, people are going to enjoy the talk more, and then they're going to get hired. Push myself, get the relationships with the shared goal when I get to have it, then the goal is going to be more likely to look after itself, because we're going to be having fun and brainstorming and doing our best work. And finding a sense of fulfillment of doing the talk with my at schools, then I'm going to be fulfilled, and I'm going to keep coming back for more. And when you come back for more comes to you. Well, that was a good saying. Maybe I'll put that in my talk. Yeah. So yeah, define the journey. Am I challenging myself? Am I here for an experience? Am I here for a relationship? Or am I here for a cause? And it doesn't have to be all four. But when you define the journey, because the destination is defined, then it's easier to engage in it and like actually articulate what it is that you are getting from the journey. So you're not just like, I'm supposed to enjoy the cold calls. No, you're supposed to enjoy the challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, honestly, really interesting. And no wonder you're doing so well with your motivational speaking, Mark. I'm feeling pumped up for the day.
Yes, let's do it.
To me, it feels like you have adjusted really well back to normal day-to-day life. Would you say that's true? And how have your expeditions affected your relationships now you're home?
Well, one thing that probably helped is like I got back and my second kid was born like 2 months later. So there wasn't like a void. What now? Secondly, having focused on the intrinsic motivations meant that like you don't have that emptiness, because you don't expect the end to change you, because it doesn't all hang on the end. There's like studies about Olympians, those who win gold and those who get knocked down the first heat, both have the same sense of emptiness at the end of the Olympics. So you can't hang it all on like whether or not you get a gold, because whether you get a gold or not actually doesn't bring you anything. So having those intrinsic motivations protected me from that post-adventure slump. I say where I did struggle was like with like really basic chores, because when you're up there, you're like, if I live through this, I'm just going to do the things I love with the people I love. And then obviously you have to do laundry, and that's not the things I love with the people I love, but you have to do laundry. But then there's some stuff which are like unclear about whether or not you have to do. And my wife and I had a lot of tension over whether or not the fence needed to be painted. And because I'm like, this doesn't have to be done. The fact that the weather's good isn't an opportunity to paint the fence. It's an opportunity to go do the things I love with the people I love, hiking or walking in the forest. And now I'm painting a fence. And and I was like, if I live through this, I ain't come back here to paint a fence. So that was something, and that sort of manifested itself maybe about 12 months after we got back. And I really was like having to sort of breathe hard to keep an equilibrium through things that I didn't think were like either completely important or so that was where I struggled a bit maybe initially, but generally no, I haven't struggled. And people always ask me what's next, and at the end of my talks, and it's actually the most annoying question because I'm like, is this not enough? Are you not entertained? But I have a bucket list of things that I want to do, but again, I don't have to do them now. And even like the concept of backing my chat, like what if things change? I might not want to do them in 3 years or whatever. So like just because I say I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, doesn't mean I somehow then feel beholden to doing it. You know, if you asked me 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined a life without rugby. And then now I just have like sort of no, I'm not part of I'm played in years, let alone like be part of a club or anything like that. So maybe that'll be the case in a few years. So yeah, I have a bucket list, but the bucket list is doesn't involve, at least for the time being, could be change again, but 4 months, all my money, all my life on the line in the Arctic. It thinks of stuff like, I've got one in mind, which would be like 3 weeks long, and it's got a world record element to it, but it would be very affordable and very logistically easy. And 3 weeks is a very long time at the moment with kids, but you know, it's not impossible to imagine me going away for essentially 2 or 3 weekends. My broader point is like, yes, I'm thinking new stuff, but I don't have this like crushing existential crisis, and I feel so fulfilled by parenthood that maybe I don't need the other things.
I want to ask you about the parenthood element, Mark. As a parent myself, a lot of people may say it was a very bold move to leave your pregnant.
Selfish. You might say selfish.
I'm gonna say bold. Leave your pregnant wife and 1-year-old to go on a very dangerous mission. It's an extreme example, but you know that a lot of chat is about mum guilt. You don't really hear dad guilt, but I'm going to talk about parent guilt because I've always actually wanted to ask you about this. Was there any part of you that thought I shouldn't be doing this because of my family? And my second point to ask you about this is I even feel guilty just leaving for a couple of hours to do my show on a Saturday. That for me manifests physically that, you know, I'm leaving my daughter, whatever, but I always come back as a better parent and mum. So my question to you is around that, how does parent guilt manifest in you? And I guess for anyone feeling that maybe being a parent's holding them back on these other parts of them, that it is a need. You need to be more than just a parent, in my opinion. This is probably just coming from a personal point of view, but I do feel like it's really relevant, and I would love to explore that with you a bit.
Fuck the kids. No, I'm joking.
That'll be the next headline then when you Google Mark Agnew.
So yes, I am wrapped with parent guilt in the day-to-day things, and I sort of have, particularly going to the gym, I'm like, going to the gym makes me a better parent. It's also a good example to set to the children, makes me a better husband. I got to do it. It's not a luxury to be healthy. It's a necessity. But then when you talk about the Northwest Passage, which is much bigger and much more selfish, and the costs were huge, you could have died. It's difficult to remember, like because I was clouded with such an ambition that now I don't have it. I look back on a lot of my decisions then, you know, even when Naomi was a few weeks old, I went kayaking for like 10 days around Mull, and I'm like, God, that was a crazy decision. But everything it was all geared towards this Northwest Passage thing. I was just clouded. No, I wasn't clouded. I was driven by this thing to the extent that it makes it difficult to even remember how it felt to have something that I would have given for that much for. And yeah, I mean, everybody you see who's succeeded something, whether they're like a top footballer or whatever, like they've done that at the expense of almost everything else. So yeah, I mean, people maybe admire me, and I'm like, is this admirable? I don't know, because I'm not sure whether or not that it was the admirable thing to do. But I also felt like I knew this. I felt like by the time we got to the start, I didn't have a choice. I actually felt like I couldn't not do it now, even if I wanted to, which is ridiculous because, of course, I could have not done it. I didn't feel like I could have. So I think one of the ways I dealt with the guilt was just by accepting that it was selfish, rather than saying something like, "Oh, years from now, my children will be inspired by it," or something like that, and try and like really do some mental gymnastics to justify it. I was just like, "This is selfish. I know it is. Therefore, I have to enjoy it. Otherwise, it'll be even more selfish if I just go and do it and have a miserable time." And just accept it is what it is. And that kind of like self-validation made it easier to deal with the guilt. I don't know if it made it easier for Sophie or not. She like put up with it, and like, like any couple, if I go and do something else that puts pressure on the family, that they can always be like a conflict over that. But with the Northwest Passage, she said she'd let me do it, and this therefore has let me do it. It's not let me do it with caveat like I'll hold it over your head. I did it, and she now she never brings it up as leverage or anything. She just supported me fully before, during, and after. So yeah, it's difficult to remember like what kind of guilt I felt, because the memory is like through the prism of so many different complex emotions and drivers and motivations. But that doesn't mean I'm immune to dad guilt, because I have it even with simple things like going to the gym.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I do think you do have to pursue your passions. Obviously, yours are extreme or have been extreme, Mark.
Yeah.
And I think, in all of this, a strong partnership is absolutely key. And, I know that whatever Sophie wants to pursue, like you will be backing her 100% too. And, in any adventure, whatever that manifests in anyone's world, if you are in a couple, I think if you have that strong person with you, it kind of gives you that fire to keep going, doesn't it? And hopefully minimizes the guilt a little bit.
Yeah.
I have a quick fire round for you, and actually, Sophie, your lovely wife, has featured in one of these questions.
Oh, good.
Are you up for it?
Yes, I did once hear you I did once hear you on the radio, and you were asking like text in for icks you're feeling, and you were and I was sitting in the kitchen. I could hear you saying, "I've got one from Sophie. She hates men who say whoop whoop," and I was like, "Sophie, I said that one time." Another one from Sophie. She hates men who don't put their shoes back in the rack. I'm like, "Sophie, that with the kids took it out there. I know this is direct. This is so passive aggressive. Stop telling me off through the radio."
I will say your family are probably out there as my #1 listeners, which I really appreciate. And I do appreciate the texts from Sophie all the time. Okay, I will end on Sophie's question. But my first one for you is most underrated piece of gear.
In the Northwest Passage or just in life?
Well, I'll go with the Northwest Passage.
My flip-flops. Because obviously that seemed like an insane thing to bring to the Arctic. But it meant several things, like going out for a wee at night. I could just slip on my flip-flops, go out, and it's just a few seconds, and it doesn't become my faff. I got to put on my wellies and my socks and whatnot. And also, like, your feet are constantly in the wet socks. Like, if there's like even a bit of warmth, like there was a couple of times when you could just dry out your feet and give your toenails a bit of like room to grow. Like it added immensely to comfort. And I tied them to the front of my kayak, and at the end of the first day when we towed them across the ice, the flip-flops are covered in ice, and everybody took photos of them as a joke of my like ridiculousness for bringing them. But then people started borrowing them, so yeah.
Nice. I absolutely love that one. I didn't expect you to say that. Most unexpectedly beautiful place you've been.
Oh yeah, unexpected. I'd say the South Downs which is the South Down Way, goes from Winchester to Eastbourne, and everybody says to me, "You moved to London, you're going to lack some adventure there." And then in August, I cycled the South Down Way, and I was like, "This is a really amazing route," and it really blew my mind. And that's very close to my house in a place that isn't considered like adventure-y, the southeast. And you can, if you're willing, you don't even have to try. I'm not saying like if you're willing to try, you can find somewhere. Like it's not even that far, I just took a train to Winchester with my bike, and I had an amazing adventure.
The one thing you'd always pack that isn't essential, but you refuse to give up.
My Kindle.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Sophie gave me a Kindle for my birthday like 10 years ago, and I still sometimes say, "Thank you for giving me this Kindle. This has changed my life." And yeah, just so portable and easy. And it took to the Arctic like $50.
Amazing.
Yeah.
An adventure you're glad you did, but wouldn't repeat.
I'm probably running an ultra marathon. Like, it gave me a lot of things at the time, like ways to test myself, ways to let go of the outcome, beautiful experiences. But I feel like I can get what I'm looking for from hiking or even long hikes. But the ultra marathon put so much strain on my body. I'm like not like a little guy, so my knees blow out, and I just feel like if I don't need to run 100K in one go to get what I'm looking for from adventure.
Amazing. Okay, final question. This is from your wife. Okay. What's scarier, a polar bear or a house renovation with a 1-year-old?
For the sake of my marriage, I'm going to say that getting a house renovation with a 1-year-old is definitely scarier, and she should be a motivational speaker, because people would just bloody love. People would love to hear that story about the fact that you had to have
They would.
stuck with a microwave for 4 months.
Absolutely. You know what? She would be a really good teammate for you to do a little motivational speech somewhere together. I think you would have very interesting
Perspectives. Yeah.
debates, shall we say. Yeah.
Yeah. Debates.
She is a lawyer, so I'm going to go with debates.
Yeah.
Mark Agnew, thank you so much for joining us at the Crossroad podcast. It's been such a privilege to chat to you. And do you know what I love about I said to you before we recorded this, I feel always quite nervous when I'm interviewing someone I know. I feel more so than anyone who I don't know. But everyone who I've interviewed who we know, and now yourself, I always come away thinking, gosh, I've known you a really long time and I didn't know half of this stuff. So thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable and honest. I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's been fantastic.
Amazing. Okay, well, you go and have a lovely rest of your day and give Sophie a big cuddle from me and the kids and the next one coming very soon. Wishing you all the best. Thanks, Mark.
Bye.